Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back. It is exactly 9:35 on News and Views this Tuesday morning, and I'm now going to be talking to an amazing young lady, Mariam Jooma. I hope I'm saying that correctly. She is an analyst at Media Review Network, and she focuses on media, Turkey, and the Horn of Africa. She's written a brilliant article, and I'm just making so much dua that article finds its way in all mainstream media across the globe, because it's a really powerful message that she has penned. She talks about the violence of the alphabet, how media aids the genocide in Palestine, and just the headline gave me goosebumps. I mean, I was quite shaken up by that. So, salaam alaikum to you, Mariam Jooma Karichi. Welcome to the program, and I salute you for a brilliantly written piece indeed. Thank you for being with us on the
Walaikum
show this morning.
walaikum salam, Auntie Julie. Jazakallah so much for those kind words. I appreciate it.
And you guys at Media Review Network are doing absolutely amazing work. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all your efforts. Okay, so let's start off with the all important question. And just before I get sidetracked, where and how can people access this article?
So we're on the website mediareviewnet.org.za. We're in the process of upgrading our website, so there might be a few difficulties direct accessing it right now. But we're also available on the internet. I mean, on social media, and the handle I will pass it down when we're done.
Okay, fine. And the header of that subheader is framing media and genocide. Let's cut to the chase. In your article, you argue that the media has aided the genocide in Palestine. Uh, Elaborate on the specific ways mainstream perpetuates this violence through its narratives.
And to Julie, one of the most important things to have come out of the Gaza situation is what many people have said is that the masks have slipped. And we're talking about the erosion of all kinds of institutions. It's not just the media, but we're looking at international law, the state. Protection of human dignity on all levels has been eroded in the context of Palestine. And when we look at the role of media historically, I mean, we call the fourth estate, coming from the ancient European setup where there were the clergy, the nobility, and then the commoners. And if we have to translate that into our modern day, I would argue that we have an oligarchy, politicians, and then the common, or at least the subjects, because I truly believe we live in an imperial master subject world in terms of the way the system has been set up. So the media facilitates the narrative, not just by what it says, but what it does not say. And we can explore this further, but I think within the South African context, it's been very instructive to see how just a few journalists have been brave enough to talk about what's happening within the South African context. And this is despite our very real apartheid history, the struggles that facilitated our liberation that came through media protest. Yes, so essentially the media form the backbone of the narrative. They give the cover, they give the story as to why the genocide is okay.
Sadly, I note that organizations like the South African National Editors Forum took over 6 weeks to acknowledge the deaths of journalists and civilians in Gaza. How does this delayed response impact on the public's perception?
No, definitely, Auntie Julie, it was really, really disappointing not to have had an immediate statement. 6 weeks into the conflict, we had 13,000 civilians killed and 42 journalists. So we're having, a national editorial forum. Given that yes, it is voluntary, But we're having editors of the major mainstream media in South Africa that took 6 weeks to decry the killing of 42 journalists. So essentially, what it has done has to set the tone for whether or not Palestine is relevant to South Africa, because essentially that is what the gatekeepers do. The editorial function sets the agenda for each media house, and if they decide that it's not newsworthy to have reported on 42 journalists targeted killing, uh, then it essentially says to the South African public that Palestine is not our issue. And I, in many ways, believe that the corporate media has, because that is essentially what mainstream media is now. It is a corporate affiliated kind of PR piece. That the interests of the oligarchs, as I've said before, or the business interest supersede any kind of public interest function.
Absolutely shocking, but it is true. We've seen it play out time and time again. You highlight discrepancies in language, such as you've used the word slaughter being used more for Israelis than Palestinians. Why is this linguistic framing so powerful in shaping public opinion?
Well, essentially, the words we use create our realities. And in that article that you referred to, I also talk about, watching what the most amazing coverage from Al Jazeera and watching the documentaries come out of Al Jazeera. And one of the interviews they had done with the bureau chief, or the former bureau chief of in Jerusalem, I think it was, of the New York Times. She basically said, we use different adjectives. The adjective of massacre and slaughter does not pertain to what's happening in Palestine. And that just by itself is completely telling. It essentially dehumanizes the Palestinians, because your association with particular words then what frames your entire understanding of who the actors are. And that is what's, I think, at the heart of this entire story, is that nobody has understood who the Palestinians are in terms of mainstream media. If we look at the coverage yesterday of the almost, not almost, I mean, the absolutely horrific, um, you know, burning down of families, literally going up in flames and people dying in those fires. And we look at how that was covered by mainstream media versus the killing of IDF soldiers. For example, in Sky News, they were described as six teenage IDF soldiers. So the word teenage already gives us a sympathetic, it evokes sympathy. These are considered not, they're not adults. Whereas the Palestinian 19-year-old who died in the blaze, one of many, Rajab al-Dilu, that's his name, and never came up in any of the media articles. Um, he was just considered as one of the unfortunate victims of a fire.
Sadly, so passive language is used when they describe the slaughter of the ongoing slaughter and genocide of Palestinian people, and they use a different narrative completely when they talk about apartheid Israel. Um, But what I can't come to grips with, Mariam, is the fact that we're seeing all of these images being flashed across our screens, not only here, but all around the world. And despite that, despite those horrific scenes, people, or white people or sympathizers of Zionists, seem to be absolutely blind to those images. And I kind of ask the question, I keep saying this with every person that I talk to on the Palestinian issue, I keep bringing it up. Where is the humanity? Goodness me. How do you live with yourself? Do you not have a conscience knowing that you have destroyed lives? You've You've shot someone, you've killed someone, you've blown up a house with maybe a family of 10 in that house. And you
Mhm.
yourself, you're a 16-year-old, you're an 18-year-old, you're a 21-year-old. Are you going
Mhm.
to be able to live with yourself going forward, carrying all of that with you? Your thoughts, Mariam?
No, Auntie Julie, I think this comes down to context in the sense that the media refused to give us the historical timeline. So October 7th has not happened in a vacuum, as many other commentators have said. But we need to look right back to the colonial gaze. And this is where the work of Edward Said, in terms of his, prolific Orientalism thesis comes through. And that's about how black and brown bodies, if I may call it that, are perceived from the colonial Western gaze. So essentially, Palestinians have been acceptable in the media as long as they are passive. The minute there's a sense of resistance, the minute there's a sense of agency that they take and reclaim of their power, that's when the terrorism label comes through. And that's when you can then diabolize them. I would just like to highlight the fact that today is actually the start of the Media Freedom Festival that's been hosted by the Goethe Institute together with the German Embassy in Johannesburg, as well as SANEF and the Press Council of South Africa and Media Monitoring Africa. And yet, on their schedule of speakers and of events over the next 2 days, the festival is running for 2 days, there is no mention of Palestine in any of the discussions. What they have is global solidarity, a session dedicated to that. And when we registered for that, it was fine. People from, several journalists registered. And now when we go back to the website, it says invite only. So they've obviously looked at who's registering, what the ideological background is, and now they've decided to close it down. So essentially, coming back to what you've said, the idea that you can't connect to a human being is literally because you shut down any voices that offer that sense of agency and that offer the sense of humanity coming from the other side.
Did you expect anything different from the Goethe Institute? I mean, they German funded, it's a German institution. We know Germany's views on Palestine and how they backing and supporting apartheid Israel. That being said, we do have to wrap up shortly. Two very
Mhm.
important issues that we do need to raise is you talk about Generation Z. They've used alternative and social media to raise awareness. I kind of wonder if we didn't have that scenario, would this genocide, which is reaching proportions of Holocaust, have been that openly displayed to the rest of the world? Can you just imagine that atrocity?
Absolutely not. And in fact, many comments on social media have commentators on social media have said that imagine what they've done in the past when there was nobody looking. So Generation Z has really empowered empowered the world literally to look into the soul of their own governments, look into the soul of their own ideologies, and question, are these institutions reflective of my values? And through the power of social media, I think we've developed one of the, perhaps, if you look at it in a positive light, one of the most powerful social activism movements to come out of all of this tragedy, which has been spearheaded by Generation Z and social media.
I could talk to you for the rest of the day, but very quickly, in your article, you compare media complicity in Palestine to the role of media during the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide. What forms of accountability do you believe are necessary for media outlets today? And there should be accountability.
100%. I would recommend your listeners to look up Craig Mokhiber, Mokhiber. He's a former United Nations senior staffer and actually left the UN just before retirement in protest against the genocide. And he's a human rights lawyer. He's discussed a lot about in his recent articles about international law and how international law can be applied to the media with regard to accountability. Coming back to Rwanda, in Rwanda's case, there were actually four journalists who were sentenced to life imprisonment for their involvement in inciting the genocide.
Sure.
That was the outcome of the Rwandan tribunal. So I would say, in the context of Palestine, we have overwhelming documented evidence of, atrocity and media involvement in encouraging the atrocity. So essentially, it is up to us as civil society to make that move forward.
Finally, in closing, then, how should audiences hold journalists and media houses accountable for biased reporting or harmful framing of international conflicts? And that's really, really crucial.
I can't emphasize this enough, Auntie Julie. Our community, and when I say our, I don't mean just Muslims, I mean people of conscience, need to be more engaged. So, yes, we read articles and then we're outraged. But what do we do with that information? We need to be writing to the editors, we need to be tweeting, we need to be on social media, on Instagram, speaking about the fact that these are the ways in which we are being framed. If there is no backlash from us, there's no incentive to change. A very good example now is, the Leila Khalid Drive discussion, and I see this morning that there are over 60,000 handwritten letters that are going to be delivered to the council. So actions like those really not just empower us, but it gives the media a sense that there is an accountable section of the community that we need to be cognizant of.
Mariam, that's where we have to leave it. Wonderful talking with you again after a very, very long absence. You are an analyst at Media Review Network and you obviously focus on media, Turkey, and the Horn of Africa. Looking forward to future discussions with you. Go well and salamu alaikum to you.
Walaikum salam. Jazakallah so much, Auntie Julie.
It is exactly 9:52 a.m. News and Views. Going to be wrapping up with our final interview of the morning. And exactly what Miriam said in the interview with us just now is we're going to look at the signatures that is going to be delivered to council tomorrow regarding the renaming of Santon Drive to Leila Khalid Drive.